Coming up towards 6:17 in Trinidad and Tobago as we get going with our interviews this morning. Thanks very much for being with us with all the many different options that you have available to you. And that was a bit, of course, of Ring the Bell. Lutalo Masimba sadly passed away not so long ago, former head of TUCO. In fact, he was the head of TUCO at the time of his passing, the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians organization. And of course, they are coming into Calypso History Month as well. But let's talk about workplace policy, shall we, in this time of the pandemic. You might say better late than never, but this is Trinidad and Tobago. Might be never, never, even with all of the alleged dialogue that is taking place. Government, unions, employers, business chambers met yesterday to discuss a possible workplace policy regarding COVID-19 vaccinations. Well, in today's Express newspaper, Planning and Development Minister Camille Robinson-Regis says the meeting was not about mandating COVID-19 vaccines for employees, and that the concerns raised about the workplace policy by the unions and business groups will be presented to the Prime Minister, because let us not forget, the Prime Minister is the ultimate authority on all things governance in Trinidad and Tobago. In a media release on Sunday, Minister Robinson-Regis said, and we quote, "The primary intention of this meeting is to engage representative stakeholder groups in dialogue to discover collaborative methods of directly tackling vaccine hesitancy and finding common ground for public safety, especially in Trinidad and Tobago's workforce," end quote. How close was yesterday's meeting to obtaining that objective? Did the consultation take into perspective workers' rights? Well, we're joined now by Ozzi Warwick, General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement. We should be joined in a short while as well by Joseph Remy, President of the FITON, getting a little confused there with all of the different titles. But Ozzy is with us. Good morning to you, Ozzy. Thanks very much for joining us. How would you describe yesterday's meeting or dialogue, or however you want to refer to it? How would you describe it? Good morning to you.
And good morning to you, Fazeer. Always a great pleasure to be on your program. I would like to start off by saying that, this meeting is coming when the horse have more or less left the stables. Because we've been calling for this for a long time. We have, in fact, in the absence of leadership at the level of the government, you would be aware that we had to reach out in bilateral discussions with the business community. And the other part of it, why I say that it's coming at a time when the horse have left the stables, even as the government continues to say that their vaccination program is a voluntary vaccination program, it's not mandated. You still hear a lot of workers complaining that employers are in fact forcing them to take the vaccine. In fact, they are making it terms and conditions for employment. So I would say that the meeting is coming at a time when the horse have left its stables. We now have to try to run down this horse and put it back in the stables. How successful will we be at doing that? I think that is really, again, up to how serious the government is about engaging with stakeholders, because that is really at the crux of it. It cannot be governing by pronouncement. It has to be on the basis of consultation, but not just consultation, but taking into consideration various stakeholders concerned. The other thing, Fazeer, especially with respect to the response to the whole COVID-19 pandemic, is this, the government really wanted to try to do it alone. And they are recognizing, maybe a little late, that you cannot respond to a pandemic on your own. You need various social partners, and a key social partner would, of course, be the trade unions.
All right. I think Joseph Remy has joined us now. Mr. Remy, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us as well in our discussion this morning. And of course, I hope you recall the discussion we had with you just over a month ago when you were talking about this dialogue with the employers' representatives in, again, as Ozzy Warwick just mentioned, in the absence of a clear government strategy at that stage. Would that have actually advanced the process, that there would have been some consensus between employers and trade union representatives at yesterday's dialogue? Good morning to you, Joe.
Hi, good morning to you. Good morning, Comrade. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. And it's really a ticklish question to answer in terms of advancing the process. And I think someone else is putting it into the context. I believe that the government would have reacted, and it was really a reactionary move, and one to gain political mileage and points. I am very clear in that belief. Because after the fact, we 18 months into a pandemic, and I heard you yesterday, I think, spoke to the issue of the Minister of Labor's reluctance to come out in the public and say exactly what the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee's report would have presented to the minister. That is before cabinet. It's going in 2 months and more that this report is before cabinet, and we have heard absolutely nothing on it. And that question was broached yesterday when the minister did make a very short presentation. They cherry-picked out of the report and presented to the meeting. And really and truly, it was trying to put a particular narrative, a la the Petrochin issue. Let me put what I want the people to hear in the public domain. And that to us was that was disingenuous. And as such, we don't believe that I'm not sure where we are. The horse has already bolted. We will continue to do what we have to do as trade unions to ensure that workers are given the requisite protection on the job and their right to choose. We did say publicly that the majority, but all the leaders in the progressive trade union movement have availed themselves of the vaccine. We believe in the education trust to get people to take the vaccine than to be forcing people to legislation. And then we were clear that coming out of the meeting was the position articulated by the government also, that vaccination in Trinidad and Tobago is not mandatory. And I think that was the major takeaway from the meeting yesterday, that we would want to go forward with, but we would also want to join in edifying the public about the pros and cons of the vaccine and what are the benefits by doing that.
If I could go back to Ozzi Warwick, so Ozzi, if you could, put it in context, right? Because I think at the end of the day, before we conclude our discussion this morning, I'd like at the very least to understand, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, if this dialogue yesterday was actually productive. Was it the usual mama guy? Because as Joseph Remy just said, moving forward. Can this process actually move forward? Because as we were told by the Prime Minister last Thursday, there are to be safe zones from October the 11th. What would that mean? So therefore, again, I take your point about the horse bolting long time ago. But what is your perspective as far as the process moving forward beyond yesterday's dialogue to some sort of concrete, black and white stated policy regarding vaccination in the workplace, Ozzi Warwick?
I am very cautious because of past experience. Let me, again, you asked me to give some context. At the fundamental level, what we are seeing as symptoms of broken trust between those who govern and those who are being governed. And the fact is that the government over its years have shown itself not to, take into consideration the views of others, and they make statements in the public which turns out sometimes to be not correct, not accurate. And therefore, people are very hesitant to believe what is coming from the government. So this is where we are now, where a draft recommendations would have been developed by the Industrial Relations Advisory Council about 2 months ago. It is before the cabinet, and we have heard nothing. Remember pandemic leave, Fazeer? The big fanfare around pandemic leave? What became of that? Nothing. Remember that we had to leave intact. Why? Because recommendations going forward were just not going anywhere. Have there been labor legislation? No. Where is it? Before the cabinet. What happened to the National Economic Advisory Council and the recommendations? Where is it? Before the cabinet. So in critical issues where stakeholders were involved in a process that present report and or recommendations to the cabinet, we don't get decisions. But we can hear decisions being made on the basis of what we don't know. We just hear pronouncements. And therefore, this is my difficulty at this time, Fazeer, to be very, very blunt with you. This is my difficulty. How can the government show to the population that they are serious about a workplace policy on vaccination when there has been a draft report before the cabinet for 2 months? We are now starting this process? Is it that we are going to start over? Is it that we are going to hear as a concrete next step that the cabinet would have made a decision on the basis of the consultation process that give rise to this draft vaccination workplace policy, where there was the involvement of social partners? Or are we going to just hear another pronouncement, Fazeer, maybe this weekend or next weekend, of something completely contrary to what would have been presented? So this is the dilemma that we as trade unions are in. This is the dilemma that the population is in, whereby we just can't get decisions that are based on a consultation and or engagement with stakeholders. We just hear pronouncements. So what do we expect coming out of this process? One would think that there should be at least some sort of decision taken at the level of the cabinet with regards to the recommendations coming from the Industrial Relations Advisory Council.
And before we take a break, and when we come back, I want to hear what you're anticipating, if anything, from the budget presentation next Monday as well. But Joseph Remy, was there, again, maybe I missed your response, but did you get the sense that there's any willingness to collaborate, particularly from the employer side? Let me say that the government just on Mamagai, they on PR and whatever. What do you get it? Because again, there was that dialogue before between employers and the labor movement that has been going on for some time. Do you detect any willingness to reach common ground there, or are we heading for confrontation on this vaccination in the workplace policy? Just your thought on that, Joseph Remy.
I am cautiously optimistic, like Mohammed. We are going into this discussion with cautious optimism that something will materialize. I am sensing more of a willingness on the employer end than on the government end. We have to hope that this effort is not another charade and a public relations gimmickry. What was of concern to us yesterday was that at the beginning, at the onset of the discussion, we were invited to a meeting to talk about workplace policy on vaccine. And the first thing that was presented to us was the safe zone issued by the Minister of Health and the CMO, which we had no information on, so it was really to us, like trying to get some endorsement. We raised those concerns and we said, we don't want to be part of an endorsement of something we have no information on. So we were concerned about it. What we are seeing is, and there's a theory that, governments normally allow the private sector to be the trailblazers in terms of enacting legislation at the job site. And what we are seeing happening is that a lot of private sector employers, in the absence of any government policy, taking steps to implement the vaccination policy. Case in point, the Republic Bank and the big OSU. So they are going ahead and they are acting as trailblazers with the government sitting inside quietly on the side and looking to see the outcomes, because they know that because of some of the judicial challenges that may arise with the vaccination policy, it may place the government in a precarious situation. So we are hoping at the end of the day that good sense will prevail. We have made ourselves available. We are willing to engage in these discussions. That's why we went to the meeting yesterday, and we will want to see the report from the IRAC tabled as the basis for discussion to establish that workplace policy in a COVID-19 environment and in the absence of pushing this whole thing of mandatory vaccination. That to us is going to be the most important and most appropriate starting point for us to engage going forward into the future.
Let's pause for a moment, gentlemen, as we reach the bottom of the hour. It's 6:30 and we'll continue our dialogue looking at the issue of the budget and the budget presentation. And again, that's another one of those, let's say, signature moments as far as this nation of masquerade, as focusing on this big event that's coming up on Monday. But it's now time to remind you of the COVID-19 protocols. Wear a mask over the nose and mouth when you go out in public. Keep your distance from others at least 6 feet or 2 meters. Stay home if you're ill. Wash your hands often with soap and water or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Cough into a tissue into the crook of your elbow. Avoid touching your face. Sanitize those hard surfaces, please. Tabletops, handrails, doorknobs, trolleys and cell phones as often as possible. We'll be right back.
The
6:33 in Trinidad and Tobago. So apart from vaccination in the workplace, apart from safe zones, and we had Ricardo Mohammed from the business community saying yesterday it would have been good to get some detail from the government in advance of that statement from the Prime Minister on Thursday. That was echoed by our Labour representatives just a few minutes ago. It's good. It would be good to know if when the government hears, we get these pronouncements, that there's some data to support it, some policy or some piece of paper to support it, not just talking off the top of your head in that way. But talking about talking, we're going to have the focus on the budget presentation come Monday afternoon. Of course, there will be extensive pre-budget and live coverage and post-budget dialogue that will happen right here on TV6 when that happens on Monday. But let's get the perspective of our two Labour representatives, Ozzi Warwick, together with Joseph Remy. Ozzi, budget presentation on Monday, state of the economy, your expectations?
Well, Fazeer, let me just state very clearly that the population cannot take any more neoliberal policies from this government. It just cannot. You know, we were talking earlier, whilst people debating about who right and wrong about the Police Service Commission, KISS prices, they posted that their prices have increased. When you go to the grocery, prices have increased, people rents have increased. I mean, it has to be a budget that is more people-centered. And we have to forget this idea that you must run the government like a business. It's not a business. The government has a responsibility and a duty to its population to ensure that the standard of living of its population at least has improved in one way or the other. So you cannot, that idea has to be completely thrown away when we're talking about this year's budget.
Would you allow me to just come in there, Ozzi, please? Because I take your point that it's not a business, but it's not a cash register either, to just be handing out money.
I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying that it is. I'm going to the fundamental point that the government has a duty and a responsibility to its population, and the government cannot continue to take the population for a ride. In other words, it cannot now bring more taxes onto people, more restructuring, more retrenchment. You want to remove fuel subsidies. They're talking about the transfers and subsidies. So at the end, where are people in that? Where are the person who have to find money to buy groceries, to put food on the table? In other words, what has happened, Fazeer, over time is that the human being, the reproduction of daily life of our citizens have been removed from the equation when talking about budgets. And we want to see a budget that have put people at the center, that targets the vulnerable, that ensures that our children, many children who have been left behind as a result of online learning, how are they going to be brought back into the system and be at least placed on equal footings? How are we going to address the debt owed to workers over all these years? So these are some of the issues that we would like to see addressed. But at a fundamental level, Fazeer, the population just cannot bear any more burden of economic adjustment. I mean, if they continue down this path, there will be a social explosion that we haven't seen in many decades. So I would say that this budget has to be one that places people at the center. Now, let me also say that whether they are able to do this or not, but one would have thought that at this period of time that you would have a budget that engenders some level of hope. But I mean, that hope and this government seem to be very far apart.
And Joseph Remy, before we wrap up, your perspective on that, because let's say it were to happen. If it were to happen, as Ozzi Warwick is advocating, you were to get a people-centered budget presentation from the finance minister, would that give you confidence?
You know, Faz, I didn't like how you put me in that position. You asked me to bat film, Mr. Ran, and I never seen ball yet. Would you get a people-centered budget in Trinidad and Tobago, Faz? I would really hope that, you know, I'm trying to give an honest answer. You know, with my mildest expectations, if that happens, it may create some level of hope. But again, you know, we have seen the budget as an exercise where they implement those policies, they impose those policies on the citizens without any fear in terms of what the effects are. I understand that you have to run a country and it is not an easy task, but they put their hands up in the air and ask to be the ones to guide us through these situations. And as such, we have an obligation and a responsibility to listen to the citizenry and do things that are necessary. But how could you have any meaningful contributions to the budget. When you are engaging in a dialogue with the Minister of Finance this week for a budget that is going to be presented next week, a budget is prepared long before that. So you're engaged us in those cosmetic discussions to say you consult without taking into consideration the views and the expectations of the persons on the ground. And I believe a COVID-19 situation requires a different thinking to the budget. One thing I would like to say before I leave us is about since 2010, when Comrade Abdullah was the head of ICANN, we raised the issue of the $15 billion in tax revenue that they are not collecting from those persons who have been evading it. I'm hearing now still that the government is still trying to recoup that fund. There are people who don't honor their obligation. I'm not talking about big businesses. This is not no small man owing no $15 billion. If they recoup that money, we will find ourselves in a much better situation because we're going to reduce the deficit and we are going to have enough resources to provide some level of livelihood to the average person on the street. We have to go after those persons who have been diligently over the years perennially neglecting their obligation to pay their taxes. And they come in at the small man every day and we have an obligation to pay, otherwise we'll be placed in some kind of penalty kind of situation. I have a serious concern about it.
Joseph Remy, we want to thank you very much for your perspective as well, indeed. And as a former fast bowler yourself, you like to dish out the bouncers, but I hope you show a broad defensive bat facing up to these deliveries as well. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Ozzi Warwick as well. Of course, Joseph Remy, former Trinidad and Tobago under-19 opening bowler in the early 1970s, and indeed batting on a different pitch, on a tricky pitch these days when you're talking about the labour movement. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for being with us this morning. 6:40 in Trinidad and Tobago as we go to the break. Here's a sunrise captured in Mayaro by Ken Mahis, and it's a very nice sunrise in Mayaro with a bit of the foliage and the coconut trees as well. And now we have for you a sunset captured in Couva by Marsha Alicia Barrington, another one of our regular contributors, with the rich lush green foliage in the foreground. Looks almost damp, that foliage, with the heavy showers that we sometimes experience in mid-afternoon. We'll be right back.